Hey guys, Cody here, and today I'd like to talk about Omni Wheels, Holonomic Drives, and kind of the difference between a regular wheel and just this newfound Omni Wheel thingy-mabob. So on the top here, we have an Omni Wheel, oops, and on the bottom we have what's known as a traction wheel, or in other words, just a normal wheel. And so we can see that these obviously look pretty different. In fact, these are the new ones. They're the fancy ones. This is seems to be the way Vex wants to build things from now on, so that's cool. So if we look at the Omni Wheel here, one of the differences we can see is that there are these rollers, which they look kind of funny. And so if you don't know what they are, they're basically inside the wheel. There's a little spot. I think this is the axle, and in this spot is a roller. It's kind of like a mini wheel, and in the center of that is an axle going like through the screen. And so the Omni Wheel is kind of covered in these things. They're all over it. They're just kind of encompass the entire wheel, and they're kind of organized such that if we draw just a wheel here, such that the centers of these rollers, if I just draw the axles, are kind of tangent to the wheel. So they go all over the wheel, and they're completely tangent to the wheel. So what this lets the Omni Wheel do, that's a little bit different than a traction wheel, is basically on one side of the wheel, so if this is our wheel, in an Omni Wheel, so we'll draw the casters just to make sure we know what we're talking about. In an Omni Wheel, these casters allow the wheel to slide in this direction and this direction, basically perpendicular to the shaft. Or, I'm sorry, parallel to the shaft. So, whereas in a traditional wheel, there's a fair amount of resistance, in fact, as much resistance as you have traction, going forward. In the Omni Wheel, there's this weird characteristic where the wheel has traction, which I'll draw in red, along the wheel, but it does not have traction, so no traction in blue, or very little traction, I should say, in the blue direction. And that's thanks to these casters, so that we can just draw some of the casters in here, just to make it clear what we're talking about. Alright, and we'll draw the axle as well. So this is actually really, really useful because, well, actually, let's just look at a few use cases. So first of all, we can see that there's one direction that we can apply power. That's this red direction. Yeah, we can apply power here. But in this blue direction, we have slip. So we'll just denote that as S. Slip is the notion that this wheel will basically slide in this direction. So when we spin the shaft, we get power out of this side and this side. But regardless of whether the shaft is spinning or not, if the wheel is pushed, if we just have some kind of external force come in here and push the wheel, it will have a tendency to slide on the blue lines. So this is actually pretty cool. So one application that a lot of teams like to use is they'll take a regular wheel in the center of the robot. So let's just denote this is the center of the robot and this is forward. So that's kind of our forward dealio. And so what they like to do is, as we know, if this robot turns, right now it has a fine turning radius. It doesn't even matter how far the wheels are. The turning radius will be okay as long as the wheels aren't like ridiculously big, and even then it'll still be okay. But if we want to add wheels, like in the case of a four-wheeled robot, we have a bit of a problem where we're going to get, some slip, or not some slip, some skipping of the wheels, if you will. Because basically, let's just say we were going for 6 wheels, right? We wanted a 6-wheel drive robot. Okay, so we had our wheels, no problem. Well, the problem here is if we look at the overall shape of these wheels, here's the center of this wheel, more or less. Here's the center of this wheel, center of this wheel, center of this wheel. We have this really boxy rectangular dealio, and it doesn't really, I don't have to go into the huge physics lesson on why this is. We can just see that if we want to spin this robot on its center, like this, these wheels out here, since they're farther away, have to spin in a way that they don't want to spin. Like, these two are fine, they're happy because their centers can go right with the rotation force, but these guys have to do something funny. They can't, they have to kind of like do this number, and they don't, they're going to resist that, right? Because they can only spin this way and this way with the motors, and so they need to actually kind of, so in this case it's okay, right? Because we're still tangential to we're still tangent to the axis of rotation, but in these guys we're not. Since we're not, what we really need to be doing is going this way. But there's not really an easy way to do that with these wheels because they have traction in all directions. They can only kind of alleviate that traction by forcibly spinning forward or backwards, and it's not enough. So what will happen is these outer wheels will tend to slide or skip or stutter, whatever you want to call it. Now in a car, what we tend to have is a differential built into usually the back wheels that kind of alleviates this by allowing certain wheels to slip, like the inside wheel can go slower and the outside wheel can go faster and still get your power and stuff. And we have those in robotics, and we could definitely do that if that's one solution to the problem. But the Omni Wheels are just kind of a little bit of a more simple solution. So if we basically redrew this picture, but instead we used regular wheels in the middle and Omni Wheels on the outside, which I will denote by just drawing the rollers. So if we, there's some Omni Wheels, okay. If we use these on the outside, what we get is an interesting phenomenon where we still have the center of a robot here. These wheels are still, the center two wheels are still okay because they're still basically tangent to the axis of rotation. So we're still good there, like okay. But the Omni Wheels, which are not, have this interesting phenomenon where they, because they can slip freely in these directions, are able to deal with this sliding kind of motion just fine because they're Omni Wheels. They slide all the time. They want, actually, they like sliding, and that's the reason they exist. So while we still have this problem of the wheels having to drift out around that axis center, we actually essentially have given them a place to alleviate that portion of the vector. And then the other portion of the vector, you can think of it like this. The wheels can still spin this way, no problem. They want to spin this way, so this portion of the vector is dealt with by the ability for the wheel to move just by powering it, and this part of it is dealt with by the sliding notion of these wheels. So these wheels kind of give and take a little, and they're able to turn much better. The end result is that a six-wheel drive config like this ends up turning much better than if you had all traction wheels. Just because you've got slip on the outside. And people like this because this tends to be a very stable platform to build a robot on top of. You have lots of points of contact with the ground, you've got lots of rubber on the field mat, you've got this typically is like as big as the robot's going to be, so right on the outside, so you've got a very large base to distribute your weight across, things like that. These are all positive pluses for building robots with these kind of drive systems. Another type of drive system which we can look at, which is what I want to spend most of my time talking about, is a holonomic drive. So let's write that down. Holonomic drive. Okay, so these come in two kind of standard designs. There are actually many ways you could build this, but these are the two that tend to get built. And so first of all, what is a holonomic drive? Well, a holonomic drive is a form of an omnidirectional drive, or I should say omnidirectional drive system. And what that means is that it's a drive that can effectively move in any direction. It doesn't need to rotate and then move just forward or backwards. It can go wherever it wants to go, which is great because if we're navigating the field, we can just worry about, we don't have to kind of direct our force in a certain way or spend time rotating and then going forward. We can just kind of strafe, if you will. So a simple version of an Omni Drive, which we can look at, which doesn't really work in practice, but let's just play with it for a mental example here, is what if we had an Omni Wheel like this? So again, this is kind of a contrived example. And we had one right next to it like this. And let's say that we had somehow balanced the weight of this robot so we don't have to, maybe there are casters on the outside edges just to make this thing actually work. And this is from above. So could we theoretically drive in any direction? And the answer is pretty much yeah. If you think about it, if you want to move forward or up in this case, we can apply power to this first wheel, and aside from little drifts and things like that, it would move up, because what happens is this wheel slips perfectly, or at least near perfectly, and the other wheel's power just takes us up. So if we should think about this as just, if we ignore the friction that would be caused, if we assume that these wheels have zero friction and that these things don't want to turn, that would work. Same story for down. And if we wanted to go left or right, this other wheel would take over and it would apply power in the left or right direction, and we could move left or right. What's interesting is if we basically have the ability to move in an X and Y direction, like we can kind of denote these as, let's see, we can kind of denote these as, like this is your X, right, and this is your Y. Then we can do interesting little tricks where, what if we went a little bit up while moving a little bit to the right? Well, if you know vector, if you understand vectors at all, we understand that this is a vector. It's got a direction and a magnitude, so it's a vector, and this is a vector as well. And what we know is that when we have two vectors that are acting on each other, we add them together and we get the resulting kind of vector, which is where we actually want to move, which is the sum of the first vector and the second vector. Or to put it another way, we can move this guy over here, and we can take the hypotenuse, and that's where we actually go. So with the ability to kind of put some power in the X direction and some in a right and in the Y direction, we can essentially begin to form these diagonally vectors, which allows us to kind of move, not kind of, it allows us to actually move in whatever direction we want. The trick here is to just vary the power to the X and the Y axis. So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, just stick with me, okay? So that design isn't really practical because, 2 points of contact on the ground isn't enough, and, this thing can't turn and things like that. We like to be able to rotate or change our heading as well as move in any direction and things like that. So we get to the X and plus drives now. So we'll start with the plus. We just kind of segment the page here. Okay. The plus drive is a holonomic drive. Has a center. We'll denote an up, and there's basically a wheel here, wheel here, wheel here, and a wheel here. And these are all Omni wheels, so we can draw in the little Omni dealios, little rollers, casters. Okay, so if we remember, this is kind of an interesting configuration, because if we think about it, these two wheels have a tendency to slip in this direction. Not that they will slip, it's just that if they're moved, they'll kind of let go of this. They'll kind of do whatever. They don't affect in these directions, is what I really want to say. They have very little traction, very little grip, not grip, but like they, since they roll, their friction is very low in these directions. And then of course in these directions, the friction is very high, because those are stationary, they're not rolling, so they won't give up basically in this direction. Okay, so this is kind of just an evolved version of what we already had, right? We have two ways to move. So if we wanted to move forward, for example, we could apply power to this wheel and this wheel, and we would absolutely move forward. Okay? All right, there we go. And the same story for these two wheels. We would also be able to move left or right just by applying power to these wheels without doing anything to the other wheels. That should make some sense. Okay. So if we want to move in any direction, just like we said before, all we have to do is move a little bit up and a little bit over at the same time. So basically, a little bit of power here. Oopsie. My bad. Still in the eraser. If we apply a little bit of power here, a little bit of power here, and we apply a little bit of power here, and a little bit of power here, we end up going basically this way. So if we think about that, it's just this arrow or vector plus this one, and we end up getting one like this. Now let's actually look at this for a second here. This is basically an interesting scenario. Actually, what I'd like to do is I'd like to grab this and let's see if I can copy it. Highlight, pin. Let me just, there we go. Let's paste that on a new page. Okay. I think I can just, that didn't work. Oh well. I tried. So if we look at that, we can actually see something kind of interesting here, which is that if we take a force of just 1 and a force of 1, it's a terrible one, and we add them together, what is the resulting force? Which I will draw slightly better. Well, this is the right-angled triangle, so the resulting force is just the hypotenuse, right? So we know from Pythagorean theorem that if we take this and this, we add them together, so 1 plus 1, and we take the square root, we get the hypotenuse. Sweet. Oops. And if I could draw better, this would go faster. All right, so hypotenuse is equal to the square root of 1 plus 1. So what we actually have found out is that the vector that we're interested in is that we get from a unit of 1 and a unit of 1 in both the up and the left or right direction in this case is actually root 2, which if you know what root 2 is, you know it's about 1.41 dot dot dot. Okay, so the interesting thing is we actually end up going faster. When we go just forward, we have a force of 1. But when we go sideways, or at 45, I should say, we end up with this weird root 2 or 1.41 thingy, which basically means we're going 41% faster, which is weird. But that's just the way it works out. You can think of it one way as kind of, if we just go back a second here, and let me, let's just erase this. If we go back, if we can think about this as kind of the combined effort of going forward and sideways, and so the combined effort just ends up being a little bit more than what we started with, at least in terms of speed, which is fine. We do actually lose some torque, basically some pushing power in doing this. So first of all, if you're moving forward, you only have 2 motors running at any given time anyway. So 2 of them, since they're kind of not running, they end up not helping you when it comes to pushing things. But we also lose it in some of the sliding as well. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert at the physics part of this. I'm a computer scientist, so I'm not going to attempt to explain that in this particular video. But as far as the speed goes, we do notice that in all of the diagonals, we get a 40% kind of boost. And we know that in all the straights, we get just a 1. And so what we kind of can understand is that there's a bit of a mapping where as we start to get more diagonal, we actually get more speed. Things go a little bit faster. And then as we get closer to the straights, we get closer to what our normal speed should be. So this is important if you're calculating, like, how far the robots traveled, or just even if your drivers are just driving. It's important to understand that in these directions, things go faster. But what's interesting is that in the directions we tend to travel the most, namely forward, backwards, right, left. In these directions, we tend to be the slowest, and we have the least amount of power. So this is important because we'd like to, in the directions we typically travel, have the most speed and the most power. So this is why the X drive is basically at least my preferred choice when it comes to building a holonomic drive. Oh, and just before I go on, I should actually mention that to rotate, it's actually really easy. All we have to do is spin all of the wheels in the same direction, and the robot will have a ridiculous tendency to rotate. In fact, it probably rotates better than any other drivetrain ever because all of the wheels are pushing the robot in the desired direction, and more importantly, all of them are tangent to the center of the robot, or the axis of rotation, if you will, or the point of rotation, I should say, in this case. So all of the wheels are in nominal positions to rotate. In fact, in code, I typically actually half or quarter the power in rotation loops just because it tends to surprise the drivers how quickly and how much power and oomph there is behind the robot when they go to rotate it. They tend to have to be really, really they tend to have to really, really finesse the sticks, the joysticks that is, to get usable rotation out of a drive like this because it's just so fast and powerful in that particular quantity versus when they're normal controls. So in order to make life a little easier for them, you can kind of mess with the mapping of the controls for rotation. And like I said, you could do a log a curve if you wanted to, which is one perfectly valid way to do it, or you could just half it in general, which is fine because you're going to lose the power, but you don't even need it, so it's no loss. Or you could half it and then log curve it if it's really crazy, whatever works. But anyway, in the X drive here, we have, just like before, we have a center. But instead of the wheels being kind of with it, they're actually at a diagonal, at a 45, basically. So let me see if I can draw this good. Well, I should say. That's terrible. It's pretty terrible, too, actually. Let's see. Let's draw this. Okay. So there's our X drive, which is... I'm still not happy with that. Let's see. Better. Kind of crappy, but that's okay. So the same story applies. The wheels towards the center. It's the wrong color. Towards the center. Still slip. Same dealio. And towards the out or the edges of the wheel, they still have a tendency to they still apply power in these directions. So everything's essentially the same. In fact, you can actually just think about this as a rotation of this other drive. So if we actually, let me see if I can do this. If we rotate, how do I rotate? If we rotate this, which I don't know if I can do, I don't think I can. Oh well. If we rotate this, you can kind of see that it's just a 45-degree version of what we just drew. So if you think about rotating this just like this much, you can see that or another way to think about it, if you just see that an axis like here, and here, and here, and here, we can see the same axis here on this other drive. No problem. Okay. So, same story, same kind of characteristics, just switched around a little bit. So, if you want to move forward in this drivetrain, all you have to do is move this wheel like this, and this wheel like this. And if we add these two vectors, we just put them back to back, we end up getting a vector that's completely forward. and that's exactly what we want. And like before, this is a right triangle, so this is going to be root 2 of whatever you put into it. So this is going to be your 41% faster axis. And the good news is that that is now pointed forward the way we want it to be. So now you're quick when you're going forward, left, right, and back, and you're a little bit slower just by 40% when you go in the diagonals. And keep in mind that that 40% gain is beyond what your wheels would normally do. So you should factor that in when you gear the robot, but you're not actually losing speed anywhere. It's just this phenomenon. So what this basically means is that we have the same characteristics as the other drive, except we are fastest. So I could just kind of write this here, fastest going forward, and we have the most power. That is going forward. So I should say going forward. We'll just do F. Go forward's the same here as well. Okay. So in practice, these drives, in my opinion, work really, really well. But the one misconception, one thing that people have a really hard time with is how do you program these things. So we will save that for another video, but this has been kind of a demonstration of how these drives work. So keep in mind that, again, Holonomic Drive, if we go back, just kind of recap. These drives are built using Omni Wheels, which have casters on them that allow them to slide freely as they in a parallel direction to the axis. They are perfectly capable of applying power in a perpendicular fashion. This is because of these casters here that are embedded in the wheel. So if I just erase these really quick. All of this is quite normal for this kind of wheel. The difference being that difference between these and the traction wheels is just the casters. That's the only real difference. These wheels are excellent at alleviating rotational problems caused just by having wheels that are far out from your point of rotation or your axis of rotation. These wheels tend to alleviate this problem by allowing a portion of the vector that is needed to rotate be kind of ate up by the slip part of the wheels. It just kind of does it. We can take two of these wheels theoretically, but not practically, and we can make kind of an XY plotter, and as we plot over time, if we go up and sideways at the same time, we can create these angled line dealios, which basically allow us to move in whatever direction we want because of the way the vectors add up together. We talked about two different ways to build real drivetrains out of these wheels, which I should kind of go in here and add the, whoops. Oh, no. Should go in here and add the casters just to show that those are Omni Wheels. Okay. Okay, so we saw two different ways we could build these kind of drivetrains, and we did a little bit of math to show that in the let's call it the diagonal directions, just in the plus drive's frame of reference, or in the straights in the x drive's frame of reference, in these directions, when you apply a certain amount of force, which we just denoted by 1, just kind of a unit of force, in those particular corners, you actually end up with root 2 worth of force, which is about 1.41, which is about 40% more than you would normally have. So what I tend to do when I actually gear robots, like when I want to target a speed, is I will actually factor this in, and I will to my gearing calculations, right? So I'll just gear it accordingly. And so Vex actually has some new wheels that are perfectly kind of sized as an output to work with their the gear combinations they have, and so we can actually get some really good speeds out of that. But if we just go back to here really quick, the major thing I wanted to point out was just that these wheels open up some really unique drivetrain possibilities, some that we haven't actually seen before. This is bugging me. It's just way off. That's better. So it opens up some drivetrain possibilities that we haven't really seen or explored before, which lets us kind of think outside the box a little bit, do some different things, mix it up. Sorry, my perfectionism is getting the better of me right this second. Okay, there we go. And do things that we haven't really, we don't see in the everyday world. In fact, there actually are some kind of industry vehicles like that use this principle. There are mechanism wheels for scissor lifts, things like that sometimes make it into industry, but these don't work on the road, so we don't tend to see them in the everyday world. So for people that are new to robotics, if they see a robot that looks like this, they might go like, how does that work? And so basically, now you know. Alright, I hope you liked this video, and I'm kind of trying a new format here, so I didn't talk about this initially because I just wanted to get right into it, but I have a new tablet, and so I can draw on it, and I thought, why not do some cool tutorials with that and see how they go. So let me know if you like this style, and maybe I'll do more. Alright, thanks, bye.